Hey everybody, I'm Jeff Mason. So joining me today for the first Connecting Rod, the Piston Scholar Forum, Sean Whetstone. Sean, thanks for helping me out with this.
Thanks for having me.
All right, well, without further ado, I want to introduce our guest today. It's Rod Emory of Emory Motorsports. Rod is a third generation automotive craftsman. He's known most for his creation of the Outlaw Porsche, his race-inspired reinterpretation of the classic Porsche 356. From his shop in Southern California, Rod, along with his family and his talented team, are making what I think, and many others do, some of the most exciting collector cars in the world today. So, Rod, welcome, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to spend a little time with all you guys tonight, wherever you're at in the country. As you said, I'm in Southern California. I'm a Southern California native, even though I didn't spend all 49 years of my life here. But so I'll just kind of go through a little bit about kind of me, my shop, what we do, and kind of what led me to this, place that I'm at today. You may or may not know, as you said, I've been in the Porsche racing and restoration business professionally since I was 18 years old. So that, kind of dates me back to about 1992 is when I got into this professionally. But my story kind of starts, even, further back from that. My grandfather, who was Neil Emory, he had a shop, Valley Custom Shop, back in the 1940s and 1950s. And I'll kind of show you a picture, but this is some of the cars that he built. This picture was actually taken in the Burbank Hills, about 5 miles from where I'm at right now. And he was one of the pioneers in kind of early American customizing in hot rods. He was the guy that channeled and sectioned cars. Back in the 40s and 50s, today we've got social media. So, it's like you build something or you do something and everybody around the world knows about it immediately. But back in the 40s and 50s, it was the magazines that really kind of distributed the trends and distributed the information. And so being right here in Southern California, where Peterson Publishing was and a lot of the magazines were being produced, my grandfather, if you go through some of the early like Rod and Custom magazines or Road and Track, there were articles written on how to chop or how to channel or how to section. And most of those articles were done on my grandfather because, or at least, in every magazine there was one or two, because his best friend was a guy, Dean Batchelor, who was one of the, greatest automotive writers and journalists from back in the day. And so my grandfather was a real craftsman. He built some real iconic cars. One car called the Belly Tanker, which is a SoCal streamliner that was made out of the, basically a fuel tank off of a World War II airplane. And then he built the first hot rod over 200 miles an hour, the SoCal streamliner. His shop worked real closely with SoCal Speed Shop, which is a very iconic shop that was started by Alex Exidius right here in the Valley. And then my grandfather went on to build cars that won like the Oakland Roadster Show back in the day, which is equivalent to like the Grand National Roadster Show today. So his business was, really about building, customizing old American hot rods, 50 Fords and 34, 3-window coupes and channeling and sectioning and really cool stuff. But in the 60s, the automotive industry changed quite a bit. The customizing stuff kind of started to phase off a little in the 60s, and it was more about kind of crazy paint and a lot of lowrider stuff as opposed to, the traditional custom scene. And so he got an offer to close his shop and, rather than be a small business owner, go work for somebody. And Porsche invited him to come and run the body shop and kind of the repair program in Southern California out of Chick Iverson Volkswagen Porsche in Newport Beach. So that's how kind of my family or my story shifted from hot rods to Porsche. And then my father graduated high school that same year, so in 1961. And then he went to work for Porsche also, and became the parts manager of that same dealership. So, here we got my grandfather that runs the body shop and my father that ran the parts business. And then about 10, 12 years later, I was born. And man, I mean, my earliest memories were at the Porsche dealership with my grandfather and my dad. And my dad went on to ultimately start a business called Porsche Parts Obsolete, which was he had an idea, back in the day that Porsche was a pretty small company still. They had dealerships all over, but they were riding on the coattails of Volkswagen because VW was such a large worldwide machine. And VW did all the parts distribution for Porsche. And all these dealerships were pretty small and they didn't have a lot of room for the parts. And so they were taking all the parts that were what they considered obsolete or overstock, sending them back to a warehouse about the size of Costco. And when the warehouse would fill up, they would literally throw these Porsche parts away. And so my dad, along with the guy that owned the dealership, said, we need to buy all that stuff. We can't let all these historic parts be thrown away and because they're going to be needed, down the road to service the cars or ultimately restore them. So Porsche Parts Obsolete was born in the 70s. And so when I was about 5, 6 years old, I can remember my dad had this warehouse that he was an employee. He didn't own the business, but it was his idea. But he worked for Chick because Chick was the money guy. But I can remember as a kid, I'd go to work with my dad, and these trucks would show up with big, massive boxes of parts, and it was my job to help my dad put the stuff away, and sorting parts and sorting nuts and bolts, and so I learned kind of every little piece of a Porsche, but I got buckets of bolts next to me, but by the nuts and bolts, not necessarily by the car itself, and I loved it. I loved going to work with my dad and kind of learning, the cars and so naturally, I kind of found my love for cars at an early age and didn't know that I was necessarily going to be building and restoring cars. Like any young kid that's into cars, you want to be a race car driver. That's kind of the, it's like, how can I, figure out how to drive these things and get paid for it. And unfortunately, my parents didn't have a checkbook to, launch a full professional racing career for me. My dad was a hard worker, but he was kind of blue collar. It's like my grandfather owned a shop and, kind of did everything to make ends meet. And my father kind of same thing. He worked for this guy but I learned so much from him. Going to work with my grandfather, I learned how to weld when I was 8 or 9 years old. I can remember my grandfather was repairing the front end of a 356, like what's behind me, and they're a unibody car, so it's not like you can just unbolt the fender and replace it. If it gets hit in the front, the energy transfers all the way to the very back of the car. I mean, the door gaps close up and the cowl gets messed up, and so I can remember about 8 years old, I was in the body shop with my grandfather, and I was about this tall and he was sitting on his stool, and back then he gas welded everything. So he or hammer welded everything, and so I'd stand next to him and watch him, and I'd have my little goggles on, and he'd have me hold the torch, because when you're gas welding, you're I'm sure some of you guys know you're welding, you're heating the metal and then using filler rod, and then as soon as you get it done, you're then using a dolly on the backside and you're hammering it to relieve the tension in the weld. So my grandfather, he'd heat it, he'd do his thing, and then he'd hand me the torch. And then next thing you know, I'm holding it, and then he'd be like, "Hey, Rod, I'm going to do the torch. Why don't you do hold the dolly on the backside? And then hey, start hammering it." So when I was 8 years old, I learned how to hammer weld, just not even realizing it, but because I was just standing next to my grandfather as he was doing it. So super fortunate because I got to learn hands-on from one of the greatest craftsmen in kind of automotive restoration back in the day. So when I was 12, 13 years old, I met a guy that that was a friend of my dad's. He had a big swap meet in Southern California called the Long Beach High Performance Swap Meet. He also owned a fastener company called Specialty Fasteners that distributed fasteners to the drag racing industry. And he knew that I was like, a young guy that loved cars and willing to put in the work. And he had a top fuel drag racing team, and I went to work for him. And so every day after school, I can remember seventh grade, I'd get off the bus, I'd pedal my bike, go to his place, and I'd start, learning how to machine parts and learning how to work on stuff. And so I learned kind of the mechanical side of my skill set, working on a drag race team, and did that for 3 or 4 years, and then had a really great opportunity. My dad found a rusty old Porsche. It was a 1953 Porsche. There's a picture of it right there. Little blue car that was just a complete rust bucket. And my dad, I was very fortunate because he bought this thing for me, paid $1,200 for it, and it was a completely rusted out 356. And he said, if you restore it, if you build it, then it can be yours. And so I was 14 years old, and I did. Every chance I had, but I wasn't at school. I was in the workshop. I was, restoring this car, and so I built that car, finished it by the time I was 16. So it took me 2 years, and that's really the launch point for the business that I've created today. I had to learn. I learned so much. Just like you guys learn in school. It's you got to put in the work. You got to make the effort to learn the skill set. And there's nothing that is going to help you skip through the time that it takes to actually do it. But I got the car done, and then competed in a couple of local races here in Southern California, and then it was time to go to college. I graduated high school, and I thought that I wanted to be, I knew how to weld, I knew metallurgy, I knew hardware. I mean, my boss, owned a hardware company, right? Specialty fasteners, and so I knew every aspect of metric AN or metric SAE hardware, and specifically like AN hardware and aircraft type stuff, because that's a lot of what's used in motorsport. So I thought, I've got a pretty good foundation of this stuff. I think I want to be an aerospace engineer. And so, going through school, my goal was, my sights were set on University of Washington. I thought that that was going to be the right path for me. University of Washington had a real good feeder program to Boeing, and I didn't think I could ever make a living in the automotive kind of world. I just, watched my grandfather and my father kind of always struggle in it. And so I was like, I should probably set my sights higher and maybe build airplanes. I mean, I could TIG weld, I could do all that stuff. Well, I went to University of Washington and a feeder or another program at Shoreline Community College. And I only lasted a year. The problem was I did a little internship and sat in a room with some people that were hardware designers, and I'm like, man, I know more than half these people around me, and they've got years of experience, and I was bored. I was just, for me, I didn't want to be like just a number in a big company, and I knew that I had an entrepreneurial spirit and a work ethic that I just didn't want to be confined to something like that. And one thing led to another, and I was racing at a race at the Portland Historics and met a guy that had started a potato chip company, Kettle Foods, and he was sponsoring this racing event and kind of the title sponsor. And he came up to me because my car, looked the best, and it was, obviously from a technical standpoint, every aspect of my car was dialed in, and my hardware was all safety wired, and my my alignment was perfect. And I mean, I was an 18-year-old kid that was super obsessed, and I had built an amazing car, and I was kind of winning everything. And this Kettle Foods guy named Cameron Healy said, would you consider, building a car and maybe providing some track support and all that. So that was the launch point of my business. Was I built a car and loaded it up on a 1-car trailer and took him to the track. And then I met some guys at the track that were some Microsoft guys and some Nike guys, and kind of snowballed. And one thing led to another. That one car that I built then turned into a kind of racing track support business where I had been building all these cars. This picture was taken in like 2007. And it was, basically me. And in the beginning, it was me and my wife. I got married a couple years later, and 1 or 2 employees, and, just kept kind of sticking to my guns that I only want to build cars the way that I want to build them, but I'm going to make sure that, they handle better than anybody else's. They drive better. For me, it's like I never half-ass anything, I guess is the best way to put it. Even if I'm going to lose money, I'm going to put in the effort and do whatever it takes to make it the best that I possibly can. And, there were a lot of times that, I was early on in our business. I can remember it's like, we were struggling financially, but I'm still making sure that I put the best parts on the car that I'm going to deliver. And you just kind of put in the time. And so I realized early on that the only way that I was going to be able to do this business and scale it to a point that I could really make it a viable business was I had to invest in the people around me and start coaching and training people. So much of what we do on these 356s is, and by the way, I mean, I've pretty much made my life's work around this specific car, which I think contributes to a lot of my success, because rather than being like, working on 15 different, brands and makes of cars, I realized early on that the only way that I could really, get this business scaled the way that I wanted and dial it in and get the cars, super efficient is, to focus on something. And then it was training people, finding people that were passionate about cars. And for me, I think that the most important thing, even more so than like skill or experience, is work ethic. People that are willing to work hard, put in the effort. And one of the ways that I've as a business owner, I've tried to lead my business is more on kind of opportunities and privileges for my employees rather than like punishment. It's like I always, it's privilege instead of punishment. We start early in the morning. My shop operates from 5 a.m. to like 3:30 p.m. 4 days a week, so I can give my employees, a 3-day weekend every weekend. And we quit early at the end of the day because I want them to go home and be with their family, have dinner at home, establish a good quality of life outside of the shop. Rather than kind of industry wide, you see a lot of the opposite, come in late, work late, and that doesn't provide a good quality of life at home. And so for me, it's really about creating an environment where my employees can thrive. And part of my work ethic thing is people that can't get up early in the morning and show up to work eager and ready to go. They just don't cut it, and it also weeds out the people that like to party and, do stuff late at night. I don't have a problem with people that party, but if you want to be successful, you got to be focused. And so, the way my shop operates is early morning and, you get your work done and then go home, and everybody works like 4-10. So, 40-hour week, but you get the work done Monday through Thursday. And then anybody that wants to make extra money, Friday's an optional overtime day. And for me as an employer, it's great because I know my guys that are going to, be here, my guys and girls that are going to be here, and want to make the extra money. And if I'm paying them time and a half, they got to bust their butt. They got to work for it on Friday. And if I do something else that I was kind of, rather than than punishment. One of the things for me is I don't like writing people up. I don't like, oh man, you're late. You're tardy. All of that type of stuff. So I came up with kind of a cool little program early on where I allow each of my employees one parking spot in our facility, like inside the gates. They can either have their daily driver there, or they can have a personal project. And so I only have one guy that parks his daily driver in the parking lot. Everybody else has a VW Bug, or they've got a Baja Bug, or they've got one guy has a 914, one has a Cadillac, that he just, airbag. Another one has a Toyota Cressida. And so in my, inside parking, my employees have a spot for their personal project. And as long as they're not late, so they get a 5-minute grace period, but if they're late once, they lose their keys for the month. So they can't work on their project on Friday and Saturday. But I allow them to use the shop on Friday and Saturday to work on their personal project. And it's just created a culture where all these guys and, everybody that works here, they're on time. They appreciate the use of the tools, and I don't have to write people up, because that, for me, it's more about instilling confidence and good work ethic in all my employees, and provide opportunity for them. I don't want to be babysitting, I want to, there's 20 of us here at the workshop. It's a family business. My wife has been my, right-hand girl since the day we got married in 1996, but she runs the back end of the business. That's her office right there. And then my daughter, who's 21, after college, she worked for me every summer and grew up at the races and all that. But after college, she came and took over all of our project management, ordering, procurement, parts, manufacturing, all that. And she's married to one of my lead metal shaping guys in the shop. And then my son, who's 25, he is the lead in our assembly shop, and also does all of the preservation cars. So any cars that we're doing that are going to be either restoration or preservation. So yeah, the whole family's here, and there's 20 of us total. We build about 15 cars per year to the highest level. These cars take, how much time they take. It's 1,000 hours. It's crazy the amount of effort that goes into building these cars. It takes 12 months to build it, but there's always 15 in progress. So about every 3 to 4 weeks, a car is finished up, and I photograph it up in the hills, and we deliver it to a client. So yeah, right here in our workshop, like I said, there's 20 employees, and we build cars for people all over the world. Like currently, just the ones behind me. Little 54 coupe, little roadster. These are all cars that were at a big event, Porsche event that we had a few weeks ago, Rennsport reunion, or 6 weeks ago. And these were all cars that got brought in from around the country, and they rallied with us up to Monterey, and now they're back for a little bit of service. The yellow one is just did the Napa 700, and it's being prepped for another event. And so we do some service and maintenance, but only on the cars that we build. In the shop, we're our one thing that we really take pride in is our metalwork and the fabrication side, because these 356s need so much sheet metal work. They've lived a pretty rough life, so lots of rust and decay, and then we do all the modifications. So there's basically 8 people in the metal side of the shop, and we've got English wheels and Yoder power hammers and plenishing hammers and every tool imaginable for doing the sheet metal work. And then we do all the final body work here. We don't paint. We don't do the final paint on the cars in this facility, because we're inside the air quality control zone of Los Angeles, and you can only spray water base, and some of the stuff we want to do is requires a little different materials. So we paint all the cars out in Palm Desert. And then, so the only time the car leaves our workshop is just to get the media blasting done. So all the cars get blasted with plastic media or walnut, and then So they're gone for about a week there, and then they leave just for final paint and then back. But we do all the trim work, upholstery in-house, and we build a special engine for our cars, which is something that I engineered over, quite a few years, taking a 6-cylinder 911 and turning it into a 4-cylinder. So basically all the architecture from a 6-cylinder engine, all the parts, overhead cam, type engine. So where a 356 engine is normally a pushrod engine with single plug, wet sump engine. My engine for the cars is, has still a flat type 4 engine, cams on each side, and then twin plug, all fuel injected, Motec, kind of fun stuff. So we take these little
This is the place I think where we've got some questions. Certainly, I know Sean has some questions about the development of this motor. Sean, do you want to chime in and sort of get those questions to Rod?
Yeah, most of my reading before this event was about that, which I find just, to have your name on an engine, a bespoke engine that like isn't, I mean, it is Porsche derived, but I can't imagine like the kind of work to develop the materials and the manufacturing required for that. You mentioned earlier that it's built up at Ross Sport in Oregon, and so I was like wondering why did you decide to make the decisions you did? Like, what were the constraints you were trying to work within? Obviously, the 356 chassis, but you chose the dry sump engine and the dual points and stuff like that. So, like, where did you start this, and how did you get where you are now?
Yeah, so as I kind of touched on a second ago, the 356 originally had an engine that was based on an evolved VW engine, right? So the stock 356 engine is a 1600 cc pushrod, single plug points, type engine, and you can really only get so much power out of that type of engine reliably. On our race cars, we used to get 145, 155 horsepower is about the most you can get. But it's super high RPM, peaky cam. And so to build a proper like driving car today, I mean, your regular cars that you guys drive every day have over 200 horsepower. So it's like the appetite for people today is like, you want something with power, you want the performance. And so, I knew that I needed to develop something that was going to not only be an engine that made power, but it was reliable and it was serviceable and it used as many Porsche parts as possible. So to kind of go back in time a little bit, in the 60s, Porsche, was transitioning from their 4-cylinder, like flat 4 pushrod engine to the 6-cylinder engine, because it had, overhead cams, so it's not a pushrod engine, dry sump. These are technically, they call them air-cooled engines, but they're technically an oil-cooled engine. You're drawing most of the heat out of the engine through the oil cooling system. The air-cooled part of it is just really drawing the heat off of the cylinders, but you're pulling heat out of the crankcase and all that, from the oil. So to have a dry sump type system, you get that hot oil out of the engine and get it into an oil tank through the coolers, and the hot oil sitting in an oil tank rather than, in the bottom of the engine. So that 911 architecture, has proven itself, as to be one of the most amazing engines ever. But it's physically so big, and the 356 body is smaller. So back in the 60s, there was a guy, Paul Hensler at Porsche, that really drafted this concept up. But it wasn't something that Porsche moved forward on. They were thinking about building this type of an engine that I built for the 912, which was the car kind of halfway between a 356 and a 911. It was a 911 based car with a 356 engine. They also thought that this 4-cylinder version of this engine would be good like in the 914, but they scrapped the idea, and it was just a concept, never got built. fast forward to like the 80s, and there was a guy named Chuck Beck that was the guy that's responsible for the Beck 550 Spiders and the 904s and kind of some replica type cars. Chuck knew that Porsche had considered doing this, so he took a 6-cylinder and literally cut it into 3 pieces. So removed the center 2 cylinders and then welded the back and front half of the engines together, welded it together, and built a prototype. And there was also another guy named Dean Palopoulos that did the same thing. Both these guys kind of parallel had built these prototype engines. I knew both of them when I was a kid. In fact, I owned both of their prototype engines. So they had built the first 2 working prototypes. And the one that Dean Palopoulos built, I bought from him in the early 90s and put it in a personal car that's actually at the Peterson Automotive Museum right now. And so I love the concept. I love the idea of having 911 architecture, but in a 356 envelope, the package. But for me, I needed to build I didn't want to be like taking an engine case, finding an old worn out case with pulled head studs and, and putting it in the bandsaw and welding it together and going down that path. So, about 10, 12 years ago, I was restoring a car, which was Porsche's first race car, the first Porsche that won Le Mans. And so I was kind of early to the game, 3D scanning stuff and rapid prototyping, this is about 2010. And so I took the 964 case, which is kind of the end of the air-cooled stuff, and scanned the case and then reverse engineered the 964 case, basically, using the end of kind of the air-cooled technology. Because I knew that the 964 was an engine that was proven, and the parts availability was there. And so for me to build something that could be serviced when your kids are taking care of my cars, I wanted something that they could buy parts from Porsche. So using the 964 base, kind of my decision making was, based on that, but then also the parts. So the way I went about it, after modeling the 964 case, I first considered doing a billet crankcase, just because I could make changes on the fly and wouldn't have to spend the tooling cost up front, although there'd be a lot more machining costs. So I did a lot of kind of analysis there, but also from the standpoint of like metallurgy, one of the reasons Porsche used a cast case as opposed to a billet case is heat transfer, vibration. There's just a lot of different properties in a casting as opposed to a billet component. And so I just kind of reverted back to Porsche. What would Porsche do? And that's something that I do all the time. I'm not the smartest guy, so I gotta rely on as much information as I can, find. And so ultimately, I built one engine with a billet case, and then went to casting. And since then, now, yeah, pretty much, I've got my cases. They're cast at a foundry up in the Bay Area, and then we machine them. My crankshafts, I started with scat crank, and then they weren't delivering, and now I've got marine crankshaft building them. And so it's every component in the manufacturing side is, it's obviously budget dictates a lot of it in the beginning. I spent about $750,000 developing this engine. So, and I did it over the course of about 5 or 6 years. So, early on, I had to make decisions based on, can I afford to build 100 sets of camshafts? Well, not right out of the box, So I had some billet cam blanks done, and then I had webcam or Elgin grind them. Well, today, kind of economy of scale, I have my cams built at a place in Turkey that does cold chilled cams for all the OEMs. And I was able to, because of the quantities that I desire now, I can go to a manufacturer and say, if you go to a manufacturer like that and say, hey, I want 10 cams, they're going to say, sorry, it's not feasible. But now that I can go to them and say, I want 200 cams, 100 sets, now I can invest the $150,000 and I can, get it done. So to kind of answer your question, it's a lot of what I have to do. What I did early on was based on budget and what could I do. Now that the engine's developed, now the focus that my daughter, who works for me, has is how can we, make parts and produce stuff more efficiently, more, cost effectively, and how can we, make a better product, because we can afford to build more. So hopefully that kind of helps.
You touched on the Gemund SL.
Yeah.
How did you get involved in that project, and what was that like?
So for those of you that don't know what the car is, it's actually right there. That's it right there. So, but to give you an idea what the car looks like, it's this funky little 356 that has fender skirts. And the 356 SL was Porsche's first race car ever, and the first Porsche to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans. So I would say it's probably, one of the top 3 most valuable Porsches in the world. It's, there's only one car that was the first race car, only some that win Le Mans. That particular car, kind of quick, I'll give you the quick version. If you want real in-depth detail on that, they did a documentary on it, and I go into every little nut and bolt and detail on it. But it won Le Mans in 1951, and then Porsche sold the car along with a couple others to the United States in 1952. So the cars came to the United States in 1952. And the Le Mans car actually came right here to North Hollywood, about 5 miles from where I'm at. And a guy named John von Neumann, who is a very, he's a legendary sports car racer. He was really one of the early sports car guys in Southern California. But he bought the car and raced it 3 times and then cut the roof off. So it became a convertible in 1952. So nobody knew, it was just an old race car that was modified, right? Nobody really connected the dots. The history was kind of lost, and by the 80s, it was just this red little roadster. I've got a picture of it here. It was just a red little roadster that was, racing out at the vintage races. So that's what it looked like from 1952 until we got it. And so I had raced against it. I built my business around vintage racing and knew that car was something special because it was aluminum as opposed to like a steel car like the regular 356. But nobody knew that it was the Le Mans car. It was just one of the modified old race cars. Cameron Healy, my first customer, the Kettle Foods guy, he and I had a hunch. We saw it at the track all the time. We always, talked around the campfire, if it could be. Well, for me, when I built my first car, which is kind of what started the whole kind of term outlaw in the 356 world, I took a 53 coupe and I made it look as much like this car as I could. I put body bumpers on it. I split the windshield. I put a gas filler through the hood. I put fog lights on it and hood straps. I even did these little deck lid hinges. So I took a stock 53 356 and made it as much like this car as I possibly could, because this is kind of the grandfather of all Porsche race cars, right? So if you're going to build a race car, like I said before, I always kind of look to Porsche and what would Porsche have done. So because my very first car that I built was kind of loosely modeled or inspired by this, I think I looked at this car a lot differently than most people do. I looked at it, why did Porsche make the decisions they did? What are these skirts? Why is, if you look at the pictures of all those early race cars, why do some of them have a high roof and some of them have a low roof? And, why are the fenders a little more bulged on this one? And so there was one little characteristic, this little door pocket here by the door handle. You always hear about like the early Le Mans racing, the drivers, you see the pictures, they ran across the track and they open the door and they jump in and they turn the key and they race off. Well, Porsche knew that if they were going to win at Le Mans, they had to kind of cover all their bases. And one of them was, you better make sure you can get the doors open easy. And you always hear there's like a term, key on the left for Porsche, which, and what that is dating back to Le Mans. Porsche knew that if you jump in, you want to be able to turn that key and shift at the same time, right? So it was kind of key on the left. And that's why all Porsches, except for the Roadster and Speedster, have a key on the left. Well, this car, what they did on the car that won is the little pocket right here by the door handle, they made really big so that you could reach your hand in there, and they put like early 49 VW door handles that kind of open like that. So that was a characteristic about only one car, the car that won. Well, I noticed that the car, that little red Roadster that was at Laguna Seca, had those big door pockets. It's like, man, And then I noticed that in the photos that the cars looked a little different. So by about 2009, Cameron and I were pretty convinced that little red Roadster was Porsche's first race car. So we approached the guy that owned it and said, you ever want to sell it? And he says, no, I'm going to keep it forever. Well, he was in his 80s, so we knew forever wasn't that far out, but it happened. We had nothing to do with it, but 2 months after we talked to him at the track, he passed away. And his estate then had the instructions to sell all of his car collection, and that all the money would go to research in Stanford and some really cool stuff. So they had contacted, I think, Seinfeld and a couple other collectors first, and nobody bought it. It was, it was a modified car. Nobody really knew the exact history of it. And when they called us, Cameron and I are like, man, we got to buy it. And so we bought the car. And next thing you know, we're stripping the paint off of it. And I'll show you another picture. Okay. Well, that was actually my daughter in that picture. She was only about, 10 years old or something. But she used to fly around with me to other shops that had similar cars. And this was before we were scanning. You can see she was like mixing up clay. We were actually using molding clay to make models off of other cars. But one thing we discovered, we started cleaning the numbers off the car, and we noticed that there were 2 chassis numbers on the car. Porsche, to keep things racing and whatever, they restamp numbers. And so anyways, the mystery just became like this crazy cool story. And after a lot of research and a lot of scanning cars, and my daughter and I flying around making little molds and scanning stuff, we determined by 2015 that it was for sure the Le Mans winning car, and then restored it. And Porsche had us display it at Rennsport Reunion in 2015, and then we took it to Pebble Beach in 2016, and just got through. I took it to Le Mans this year, and for the Le Mans Classic, and it was the first time it had been back around that track since 1951. So got to drive it at Le Mans, and yeah, I mean the car is just it's such an amazing feeling when you can, not only like restore something, but you can contribute and add to history. And that car for me is it's definitely, there's no doubt, it's probably the most important car I've ever restored and ever will, just because it's the beginning of all Porsche motorsport, and really the beginning of everything that I've ever done in my life's work.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for illuminating that. That's such a great story. I'm sure we could talk a lot deeper. I want to take a moment to just unmute everybody, and if you have a question, just unmute yourself, and let's open it up. I know we've got I've got some other questions. Everybody, let me know if that's working for you. If you can actually unmute yourself. I think some of you are there. Okay, cool. Just to get it started off, let me just ask a question about kind of teachers, since we're talking with, we're all students. You guys are students in class, but we're all kind of students of this endeavor. You mentioned your grandfather. Who were other teachers along the way that really made a difference for you, Rod?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always learning from as many people as I possibly can. there's one guy that was pretty influential in my life. I don't know if there's anybody here that rides motorcycles or motocross or ever did. But I grew up racing a little bit of off-road stuff and racing ATVs and dirt bikes. And my mechanic was a guy named Wayne Henson. So any dirt bikes that you see, racing Supercross or whatever, have Henson clutch or Henson racing on the side of the clutch side of a motorcycle. Well, Wayne Henson was my mechanic when I was racing for Honda in 1990, 91. And I was blowing up clutch baskets on my bikes, and Wayne developed a billet clutch basket for this, our motorcycles, and so he built a whole business on it based on that clutch basket about 3 or 4 years later. But Wayne is just a brilliant engineer, brilliant person that was so. I was 16 years old when he was in his late 30s, I think, at the time. And he was probably one of the greatest mentors in my life on the engineering side, manufacturing side, because he was a problem solver. So that's one person that I could talk for years about him. People even man, I mean, I think I based my business not just on the teachers that taught me about motorsport, but also the teachers that taught me about marketing. Everything from high school, when I was working, I kind of early on before there was CAD, because I was kind of right at the end of still hand drawing and drafting before CAD came out. Yep. But my drafting teacher, who became a lifelong friend, who recently just passed away, but he was always somebody that I could always lean on. For me, it's all about the relationships. Every single relationship and person that I've ever worked with, I've always valued that relationship more important than anything else. And I've tried my hardest never to burn any bridges and to always try to give back to them as much as I can. And I think that's really the key, because there's going to come a point where every one of your teachers, for one, you want to stay in touch with them because they're going to want to see your success and see that little contribution that they made. But there's going to come a point where you might need to lean on them, or they may come to you and need something from you. But I mean, I could go on for days about the people that have taught me.
That's great. Anybody have any question? Oh, go ahead,
Sean, if you want to go first.
I don't.
Did you have another question, Sean? Okay. Blake, it's on you.
Yeah. So I read in an article that you like as a boss, normally bosses will do kind of the office type of work, but I read that you're actually out there working with the guys and shaping metal and doing that kind of stuff. So I'm just wondering kind of what motivates you to be out there every day with your employees.
Yeah, I mean, those hands are dirty and calloused up because I'm in the workshop every day. So kind of for me, I do this because I love building cars. And that's, to the core. It's what I'm most passionate about. Fortunately, I married somebody that loves the other side of things, and my wife and I figured out how to build a business and create a balance where we can work together every day. And so she's been able to run the HR / accounts receivable, accounts payable side of our business for 27 years. And she loves it, and she's very good at it, very efficient at it, but she also was able to do it raising our kids and all of those things because it's a family business. And my daughter at a young age, was loved working with me in the shop. And when she was little, she was sorting nuts and bolts, and even to this day, she still she doesn't love sorting nuts and bolts, but that's all part of it, right? So fortunately, I've surrounded myself with people that have helped me keep the office side of our business in check. and we run there's 20 of us. We run a pretty efficient and lean business. I don't have a big marketing staff. I don't have, a bunch of people that are just pushing pencils. There's 18 of us in the shop, and then there's my wife and daughter that run the office side. So that frees me up to be in the shop, hands-on, working with my crew all day long. And, I would kind of say, I often, say I'm like the lead singer in a heavy metal band. The band would suck if I didn't, we would suck if it was just me standing up there singing. It takes all of us as a team. But the way my shop operates is it's about 200 feet long. It's 50 feet wide and 200 feet long, and it's one big room. And some people say, oh man, it's noisy and all that. Yeah, you got to wear ear protection, but I want everybody to be working as a unit. And my station is dead center, and it's basically like all of my crew is all around me, kind of like, an orchestra, I guess, the best way to kind of see it. And I'm making all the creative decisions and empowering them to do their best work, right? So, like when we start building a car, I'm the one that is there with my guy disassembling it because I want to kind of see what's going on. I want to see what the integrity of the chassis is and what parts are coming off of it. And then, I want to be the one to get it back from the media blaster and kind of look at everything. And then I start chopping it up and cutting off stuff. And then I'll shape some of the panels. I'll start clecoing it together. I'll do that. Back 30 years ago, I was the one that had to weld every aspect of it. Now I can tack it together and cleco it together and then hand it off to one of my guys. And so I'm involved in every single aspect of the cars. I'm not the best in my shop at any given task. I'm probably the most well-rounded. Well, I am, the most well-rounded, but I've invested in the people around me and helped them become the best they can be by putting them in an environment where they've got the right tools, they've got the right mentorship. We can bring somebody new in that has a desire to be a metal shaper, and 50-50 chance they're going to cut it, because not everybody has that ability or that artistic eye. But what I do is bring them into that environment. If that's where their desire starts, then we'll start them there. But I can figure it out after a while if they're going to make it or not, and I can pivot them to maybe they they're a good welder, but they just don't understand, or they don't have the experience yet to shape the metal, and I'll move them around. Might circle back and bring them back into metal shaping, but by being planted right in the center, I can kind of read every one of my employees and find their best qualities. Because for me, it's all about instilling confidence in them and giving them the tools, the mentorship, the guidance that they need to become the best they can possibly be. But not everybody's cut out to be an assembly person. Not everybody's cut out to building gearboxes, because it's just we're all different. We all have different interest levels, and we all have different math skills, and transmissions. It's a lot of math, it's a lot of numbers, it's a lot of setting up ring and pinions, and shimming, and gears. And some people, just their brain isn't wired that way.
Yeah. Other questions?
I'd like to say something.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sean. I know you were waiting after the last question.
No, go ahead.
So I just wanted to say, Rod, this is Joe Estevez speaking. Thank you congratulations, first of all, on your business and what you've done so far. And thank you for what you've done for the Porsche community. I also grew up with Porsches and Volkswagens. So it was a pleasure hearing from you and the way you grew up and what you've done so far with your business and your family. My father's good friends with Jeff and James over at Rossport and them. So Porsches are definitely something different compared to the rest of the stuff we have out there. So it takes a special mind to work on them, most definitely. So I appreciate all you've done and for talking here with us.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Yeah. Again, just like you mentioned, Jeff and his team have been an integral part in my business. You know, Jeff and I have known each other since 1997. I had him build a 906 engine for me way back in the day and built an amazing relationship with him. And we went racing IMSA for a while, and we built race engines together. And so for me, it's investing in the people around me and building something together. And yeah, that's like I said, the best piece of advice I can give anybody is just don't burn any bridges, build relationships, and those relationships, you know, there's always a time where you're like, man, I feel like I'm the only one putting effort into this relationship, but just keep putting it in. And you know, the day will come that you see it just kind of comes together.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
I've got a question, and maybe we can kind of close on this. We're almost at the top of the hour. I think, you know, now auto restoration is almost a counterculture choice as a career, which is kind of an interesting thing. We've kind of progressed that far. But, you know, leaving out wealth and fame, Rod, I'm curious as to what do you think the most valuable thing that your career choice has brought to your life? What's the thing of greatest value that choice brought you?
Community, I think, is probably the greatest thing. You know, I can't really speak for all marques and, you know, different brands of cars. You know, I can definitely speak for the Porsche community and the people that I've, you know, come to love and surround myself with. But, you know, for me, this business has created, you know, obviously, you know, created a living and all that other stuff, but it's created the fun and the community that my family and friends and I love so much. I mean, you know, it's the events we get to go to, the, you know, the activities. I mean, we're gearing up next week to do a big Palm to Pines event. And, you know, I flew my mom and dad down from Oregon. I've got a car prepped and ready for them. My daughter and her husband are going to drive a 912 they built. My son's driving one of the cars, my wife and I, and we're going to go and spend 3 days enjoying the, you know, the cars we've built, you know, out on the hills and all that. So I love that aspect of it. I think the other big piece of it, still surrounding that same thing, is my opportunity to help others kind of live out this, you know, this dream. You know, and, you know, so many people come to me and they want to build something, and, you know, so, you know, here in the workshop, I mean, I give them a job, but also an opportunity to work with their hands and learn something. And, you know, not everybody, I mean, you know, there's definitely some people that are just here for a couple of years, and, you know, it's just not, you know, they're not cut out for it, or, you know, it doesn't make them enough money, or, you know, whatever the case may be. I mean, there's so many factors, but I've got a lot of employees and people that have been with me for, you know, over a decade. And so, you know, for me, it's the ability to provide you know, a business that gives people an opportunity to make a living at something, and really at the end of the day, stand back and go, wow, you know, we created something pretty special.
Great. That's awesome. Well, unless there's another question, I think we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank all of you for being here today. This was the very first Connecting Rod Piston Scholar Forum. You know, as Rod mentioned earlier, these relationships are important. All of you are kind of entering the industry together. We're all connected through the Piston Foundation. And so I want to make sure that this forum becomes a way for you guys to stay connected with each other as you move forward in your careers. I think there's great value in that for you. Sean, thanks for helping me organize. Rod, thanks so much for sharing your time and your advice and all the stories of your career with us.
It's my pleasure. It's a real honor to spend a little time with all of you guys. And, you know, I hope to see all you guys, you know, later on in this career path. If there's ever anything that I can do to lend a hand, let me know. If you find yourself in Los Angeles for any reason, you know, feel free to reach out. We're not open to the public, but for those of you that are truly in this for the long haul, I'm happy to give you a tour of kind of what we do behind the scenes. And I just wish all you guys great success and luck, and super stoked to contribute to my small little part of this this foundation, so that I can hope to inspire more people to look at this as a viable career path, and these opportunities that are given to all of you, to help you along that way. It's pretty awesome.